Good morning. Today on Spotlight, a week America will never forget. From a historic election in Georgia to a violent mob storming the U.S. Capitol as Congress tried to conduct its business. The democratic process of government prevailed, but where does our nation go from here? We'll get insight from Professor Dave Dulio, Director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, and Ingrid Jocks, Deputy Editorial Page Editor and columnist at the Detroit News. It's Sunday, January the 10th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. What a week. I'm going to begin with you, Dave Dulio, but certainly want both of you to weigh in. Where in the world does our nation go from here? Did you ever think you'd see something like this in our generation?
Frankly, Chuck, no. And I think it was a sad day for the country. Having spent a good bit of time on Capitol Hill, having worked there, that's a sacred place for a lot of people. And to see that kind of behavior sickened me. And I think, any kind of violence, any kind of destruction around a political issue, right, is wrong. And I think we're at a defining moment right now. And what the country does from here is going to tell us a lot. What our leaders do from here is going to tell us a lot.
Sure. Ingrid Jocks, your Deputy Editorial Page Editor and columnist there at the Detroit News. I think I saw one of the strongest Detroit News editorials I've ever seen in a political sense, just to read you a little teeny portion of it, because I'm sure you know it by heart. Wednesday was among the presidency's darkest days, not since Richard Nixon stepped into the helicopter at the White House grounds in 1974 has this office been laid so low. That had to be quite a conversation there at the Detroit News. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think David hit it right when he said it was a sad day for our country. That was the first sentiment that struck me. And it just felt really surreal watching in real time what was playing out in our nation's capital. And my boss, Nolan Finley, and I were watching Trump's comments from the beginning at his rally before this all started. And as soon as he started talking, I feared something like this may happen with his rhetoric. We've called him out on it over the last 4 years, and it really has consequences. And I think we saw, just how dangerous those consequences are. He was talking to thousands of people who I think a lot of them honestly believed what he's been telling them the last 2 months falsely, that the election was stolen from him. And they were angry, and they were right there at the Capitol, and we saw what happened. And I think this really has to be a wake-up call for our country, that these divisions that we've seen grow, especially the last 4 years, they've been growing for a long time, but I think the escalation, it's scary. And I just hope that we have new leadership in Washington, that even though Democrats now pretty much can call the shots, I just think we really need to come together as a country. And those are the example of what that leadership should look like, should come from the top.
Sure. And indeed, you are correct. Over the entire presidency of Donald Trump, you and Nolan Finley and others there at the Detroit News have called him out on many occasions, which you felt were inappropriate as a president. Dave Dulio, we're hearing Congressman Dale Kildee and many others call for the 25th Amendment with only a few days left in the transition between presidents here.
In the wake of what happened in Washington this last week, everything's on the table. It's not at all surprising that there were calls to invoke the 25th Amendment, which would, of course, remove the president from office as being unfit to perform his duties. I think it was interesting and noteworthy that a group like the National Association of Manufacturers was quick to come out and say that themselves, right? So this is not coming from just Democrats. It's coming from important constituencies across the country. If it was going to happen, it probably would have happened right away. I think the longer you get away from it, I think the tougher it is to probably sell it among the cabinet members.
Sure. Ingrid Jacks, where does the Republican Party go from here?
I've been asking myself that very same sentiment, and I honestly fear for the future of the Republican Party, or just for where do conservatives go from here to a party that has tied itself so closely to one individual. What Trump is saying is absolutely false. It's damaging. It's dangerous to our country. He still has a lot of supporters. And I think the Republican Party is just going to have to take a really deep look at what it wants to be and who its base is going to be. And as a conservative, that's something I think a lot about. And I was heartened to see some of the very strong comments coming from pretty big name Republicans, including Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence, who Trump threw him under the bus multiple times yesterday, but Pence stood up and did the right thing. But I think a lot of these individuals within the party should have been making stronger comments sooner. There's some exciting newcomers to the party, including here in Michigan. We've got Peter Meyer in the 3rd District.
Over in Grand Rapids, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He came out very strongly against these things the president was saying. And we just need a lot more voices like that as we try to move forward.
All right,
John, can I jump in on that real quick?
Yeah, Dave, hold on one second. Let me just slip a little break in there. Hold on to your thought. We'll come right back and pick right back up with Professor Dave Dulio right after this.
I believe that truth is the glue that holds government together. Not only our government, but civilization itself. That bond, though stained, is unbroken at home and abroad. In all my public and private acts as your president, I expect to follow my instincts of openness and candor with full confidence that honesty is always the best policy in the end.
And welcome back to Spotlight. Dave Dulio, I apologize for cutting you off before we went to the break. You wanted to pick up and make a point.
Yeah, picking up on something that Ingrid said about the future of the Republican Party. Yes, there's this strange competition almost between aspects of the Republican base, between what I'll call traditional Republicans and then maybe Trump Republicans. And I think that the party faces a choice in how it moves ahead. Does it go all in on the current strategy of trying to keep the folks that were in Trump's base and try to move forward with that with another, say, presidential candidate, or does it go back to more sort of orthodox Republican ways? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's part of that choice is dependent on who emerges as a party leader and whether or not those folks in Trump's base are going to follow anybody but Trump. And because they're not traditional Republicans, many of them, right? They came in because Trump talked to them in 2016 the way nobody else had, paid attention to them. And I think that their allegiance is probably to him rather than the party. So anybody coming forward may not be able to keep that group of folks as part of an electoral coalition. So I think that, frankly, the choice might be made for Republicans.
You almost have to start a third party because there's certainly people talking about starting a third party, but how realistic is that in a country that has been a strong two-party system?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, Chuck, but I don't think that's really a feasible alternative for conservatives. But Trump's base, it's strong, and I mean those numbers, his base supporters have stayed very consistent over the last 4 years, and I think it's going to be extremely interesting to see if that support holds on once he does finally leave the White House. But yeah, I mean that's going to be a huge challenge for Republicans, and we saw this in races all over the country. Republicans had to, even more traditional Republicans had to walk a fine line of supporting the president, but while also holding true to their conservative, more traditional GOP ideals. I really fear for Republicans if they keep trying to walk a line and keep Trump the center of the party.
Sure. Dave Doolio, Professor Doolio, how much going forward does this have to do with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the new incoming president and vice president-elect, in terms of their message and how they govern to try to heal this very divided political nation right now?
Sure, I think there's a lot, I think, is the short answer to your question. And it really, because for years now, we've heard politicians and elected officials talk about unity and bringing people together. And unfortunately, for the most part, I think that's been lip service. I think they really haven't meant it. And what they've meant is, okay, it's time to heal. Everybody's got to come and come over to my side. There's no cooperation in there. It's, all right, if you want to work together, you got to do what I want. And I think that needs to change, right? So I think that I'll be very interested to listen to, for instance, the speeches that are given on Inauguration Day and see what that kind of tone is. But then, and I think it's probably pretty predictable. But it's the follow-up to that I think is even more important in how things are governed. Do Democrats, who are going to have, it looks like, a majority in both chambers of Congress, and there's going to be unified party government moving forward for 2 years, do they reach out to Republicans and try to get them to come to the table on some areas of policy where they might agree, or do they start from, okay, we've got power now and we're going to do what we want?
When we come back, I promise we'll turn our attention to what happened in Georgia this past week and the implications that may mean for the entire nation. We'll be right back.
To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority, as called for in the Constitution, routinely takes place, as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle.
Ingrid Jocks, Georgia, historic election there, sending the first African-American Democratic senator from the South in the history of this nation to the nation's capital. And I think I heard the youngest senator.
33, yeah.
33 years old.
That makes me feel old.
I can't remember when I was 33, and to be taking on such a big seat. That's going to, as Professor Doolio said, shift the balance of power. Democrats will control the House, they'll control the Senate, and they will control the executive branch.
The historic outcome. It's just something that stood out to me is obviously the Democrats ran an effective campaign, but I also think that President Trump really sabotaged the chances of the Republican candidates there. In the weeks leading up to the runoff election, in areas where he campaigned, where he has strong support, the turnout was actually lower. And I think by convincing his supporters that the election was stolen from him in November and that you can't trust the election process, I think that kept people home. And so it was just a very counterintuitive strategy. But the Democrats won, and that certainly opens up a lot more avenues for Democrats to push through their agenda. Joe Biden made a very strong point in his campaign of bringing the country together. And I think now that he has, the both chambers of Congress, I think this will be his, he will really need to prove whether he's serious about bringing the country together, because there have been plenty of divisions within the Democratic Party as well. It's not just in Republicans. There's, between the more far progressive wing of the Democratic Party, more moderates. I think I really hope that we don't see some of these very far left policies that I know some in the more progressive wing are fighting for. I think if Democrats keep pushing those kinds of policies, it will only continue to divide an already extremely divided country.
Could this put a tremendous amount of pressure on him and come back to haunt him?
Without a doubt, and I think that's in the short term and in the long term, or maybe medium term. I think that there's also pressure going to be mounted on somebody who's probably unfamiliar to folks in Michigan, and that's a guy named Joe Manchin, a senator from West Virginia, because to do many of the things that Democrats on the progressive side want to do, they're going to have to change the rules of the Senate and get rid of the legislative filibuster, which in shorthand requires 60 votes to pass something out of the Senate. Democrats have complained about that for a while, but they would have to change those rules to do things like, say, pass a Green New Deal, pack the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems like it's probably going to come down to whether or not that happens to Joe Manchin and whether he votes to change those rules or not. And I think that that's the short term. In the medium term, we also know from history that the president's party suffers in the next election, right? And President Trump found that out in 2018 when Republicans lost 40 seats in the House of Representatives. And Barack Obama's first midterm, Democrats lost 63 seats in the House of Representatives. So the president's party often pays a price at the ballot box in that midterm because they go too far, because they overreach in terms of their policy alternatives that they put forward. I think that, Democrats probably ought to pay attention to that history and acknowledge it. And if they want to avoid that, moderate a little bit.
All right, we're going to take a quick little pause for the cause. We'll come right back with a few final questions. Stay with us. Ingrid Jocks, turn our attention to Lansing very quickly. Jason Wentworth, the new Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives. Shirky will remain in leadership on the Senate side. Is that going to make any real major difference? There certainly has been plenty of friction between the governor, who's a Democrat, and leadership of both the House and the Senate, which have been controlled by the GOP.
Maybe this will be kind of a fresh start in conversations with the Republican leadership in the legislature and the governor. Because clearly those conversations really weren't going anywhere the last year, as the legislative leaders really felt like the governor was shutting them out completely in a lot of these extremely important decisions she was making for our state once COVID hit. Representative Wentworth proved that he can work with the governor when he was really oversaw a lot of the no-fault auto insurance reforms, which I think
right
important. And so hopefully he can continue negotiating with her. And I'm hopeful that we'll see maybe a better relationship moving forward. But the governor also has to be willing to talk to the legislature and loop them in a lot more.
bipartisanship and working together is a two-way street. And it has to be both sides, the legislature and the governor, interested in that compromise and working together. And I also think too that this is another reminder that term limits are in place here in Michigan, and it often produces this rapid turnover of leaders in the legislature, whether it's in the speaker's chair, the majority leader of the Senate, or on committee chairs throughout Lansing. And that has effects, right? Where the relationships need to then be built yet again. And folks are in positions that they maybe weren't used to just a little bit ago, and they've gotten more responsibility now all of a sudden.
Sure. Ingrid, I'm going to give you the final word on this. If there may be a really bright, shining lining in all of this that's going on in politics now, is the number of women in key leadership positions, whether it's here in our own state, the executive branch, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the leaders of both the Democratic and Republican parties for our state. And for when the inauguration comes, or the first State of the Union, it's going to be the first time we're going to see the Speaker of the House and the Vice President sitting together there in a very historic moment, and a record number of women serving on Capitol Hill.
Sure. I mean, I think it's very exciting for women. And I also think that something that was a little overlooked in some of the election results was there was a record number of Republican women who got elected to Congress. There's still a real imbalance of Democratic women who are running. But I think the more women who get involved, and is a great example for younger women to follow. And because women they're just as likely to get elected as men. It's just, there seems to be more of a reluctance sometimes to get involved with politics. But yeah, I mean, it's awesome. Our top leadership here in Michigan, even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Bridget McCormick, she's a great example too. So I think it's exciting.
All right, we're going to see where we go in 2021. It's certainly starting off with a bang. Ingrid Jacks of the Detroit News, Professor Dave Dulio of Oakland University and the Center for Civic Engagement. Thank you so much for joining us today on Spotlight. Stay safe.
Thanks. Thank you.
And I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the Spotlight. We hope you have a great week.